The stars had become graveyards. That was what Danny Cole thought every time he looked up at the night sky. Somewhere up there, floating in the cold emptiness of space, were the remains of ships and stations and colonies that had once held millions of human lives, that had taken them all. 11 years. 11 years of war against an enemy that showed no mercy and asked for none. Danny had been 23 when the first ships appeared in human space. He had been a young man with dreams of becoming an engineer, of building things that would last. Now he was 34, and the only thing he knew how to build was a body count. They were unlike anything humanity had ever faced. They stood 7 feet tall on average, their bodies covered in hard shells that could stop small-caliber rounds. Their faces had no expression that humans could read, just large compound eyes that reflected light like black mirrors and mandibles that clicked together when they communicated. They moved fast, hit hard, and never retreated. In the early days of the war, human forces had been pushed back system after system. Entire worlds had fallen silent. Danny remembered the day he decided to enlist. He had been watching the news feeds when the reports came in about the fall of New Geneva. 40 million people, gone in 3 days, that had not come to conquer or enslave. They came to exterminate. And in that moment, Danny knew that he could not sit and wait for them to reach Earth. Now he was a sergeant in the United Earth Coalition Marines. His squad was called the Grave Diggers, a name they had earned on the scorched battlefields of 22B. They had fought in the trenches of Station. They had held the line at the Siege of Titan. They had buried more friends than any of them could count. The moon of IV hung in the viewport of there like a gray marble streaked with brown. It was an ugly world, covered in rocks and dust and nothing else. But somewhere down there was a command post, and command wanted it destroyed. Lieutenant Kate stood at the front of the cargo bay, a holographic map floating in the air before her. She was young for her rank, only 28, but she had proven herself in a dozen engagements. Her red hair was pulled back tight, and her green eyes were steady as she looked at her soldiers. "Listen up," she said. "Intelligence has confirmed a command structure beyond the eastern ridge. We believe they are coordinating attacks on 3 of our supply lines from this location. Our mission is simple. Get in, neutralize the target, get out. Questions?" Private First Class Sam raised his hand. He was the youngest member of the squad, barely 21, with dark hair and a nervous energy that never seemed to fade. "Ma'am, what kind of resistance are we expecting?" Kate pulled up new data on the map. Estimates put enemy forces at roughly 200, mix of warriors and what we think are support units, heavy weapons emplacements on the nothing we haven't handled before. Danny watched his squad as they absorbed the information. Corporal Ben Hayes was checking his plasma charges for the 5th time. He was a big man with a shaved head and hands that could crush stone. He never talked much, but when the shooting started, there was no one Danny would rather have at his side. Next to him sat Amy, their medic. She was small and quiet, with gentle eyes that seemed out of place in a war zone, but Danny had seen her drag wounded soldiers through enemy fire without flinching. She had saved more lives than any doctor in a hospital ever would. The shook as it entered the atmosphere. Danny felt his stomach lurch, but he had done this so many times that the sensation barely registered anymore. He closed his eyes and let his mind go blank. There was no point in thinking about what was coming. Thinking led to fear, and fear got people killed. 2 minutes to drop zone, the pilot announced over the intercom. Danny stood and checked his rifle. It was an older model, a weapon that had been with him since his first deployment. He had named it Whisper because when it fired, the only sound his enemies heard was silence. Around him, the rest of the squad was doing the same, checking weapons, adjusting armor, saying quiet prayers to whatever gods they believed in. Kate moved down the line, stopping briefly in front of each soldier. When she reached Danny, she paused. "Cole, you good?" Danny nodded, "Always, Lieutenant." She studied his face for a moment, as if looking for something she knew she would not find. Then she moved on. The touched down hard and the rear ramp dropped open to reveal the gray landscape of IV. Dust swirled in the air and the sky above was the color of ash. In the distance, Danny could see the ridge they had to take. It looked like a wall of stone, ancient and impassable, but nothing was impassable, not for them. "Move out," Kate ordered. The squad advanced in formation, spreading out across the open ground. Danny took point, his eyes scanning for any sign of movement. They were masters of ambush. They could hide in places no human would think to look, waiting for hours or even days for the right moment to strike. The first shots came without warning. Plasma fire streaked through the air, green bolts that left burning trails in their wake. Danny dove behind a boulder as the ground around him exploded. He heard Sam screaming orders, heard Ben's heavy plasma charges answering the enemy fire with thunderous roars. This was war. This was what Danny knew. The fear faded away, replaced by something colder, something that allowed him to aim and fire without hesitation. He watched a warrior fall, its chest torn open by his rifle, then another, and another. They pushed forward, meter by bloody meter. The ridge grew closer. The enemy fire grew more intense. Danny did not think about the future. He did not think about the past. He only thought about the next step, the next target, the next breath. He had no idea that by the end of this day, everything would change. That a single moment of choice would echo across the stars. That the war itself would tremble at the edge of something no one had ever imagined. But for now, there was only the battle, and the battle was all that mattered. The assault on the ridge took 3 hours. 3 hours of fire and blood and screaming. 3 hours of watching friends fall and enemies die. By the time the last warrior collapsed, the ground was littered with bodies from both sides. Danny stood in the center of what had once been the command post. His armor was scorched in a dozen places, and his left arm ached from a blow he barely remembered taking. Around him, the ruins of alien structures smoldered in the thin air of IV. Smoke rose toward the gray sky like the ghosts of the dead. "Area secure," Kate announced over the comm. Her voice was tired but steady. "Begin sweep for survivors and intel." Danny moved through the wreckage with his rifle raised. They built their structures from a strange, organic material that grew rather than was constructed. It looked like bone and coral fused together, smooth in some places and sharp in others. Most of it was now broken and burning. He passed the bodies of fallen without looking too closely. He had learned long ago not to look at the dead. Human or alien, the dead all wore the same expression: surprise, fear, pain. It was easier to pretend they were just obstacles, just things to step over on the way to the next objective. Sam's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Sarge, eastern perimeter is clear. No survivors." "Copy," Danny replied. He kept moving. Ben's voice came next. "Found some kind of data storage unit, bringing it back to the LT." "Good work." The compound was larger than it had appeared from the outside. Danny found himself walking through corridors that twisted and turned like the inside of a living creature. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent light, green and blue patterns that seemed to follow their own rhythm. Even in death, the structures clung to some form of life. He rounded a corner and found himself at the edge of the compound. There was a smaller structure here, partially collapsed from the bombardment. It looked different from the others, softer, more curved. The patterns on its walls were different too. Instead of the harsh geometric shapes he had seen elsewhere, these were circular, flowing, almost gentle. Danny was about to move on when he heard it. A sound small, weak, unlike anything he had heard on a battlefield before. He froze. His training told him it could be a trap. They were clever. They used sounds and movements to lure humans into ambushes. He tightened his grip on his rifle and approached slowly. The sound came again, higher this time, more desperate. Danny pushed through the broken entrance of the structure. The inside was dark except for the faint glow of the walls. The air smelled strange, not the usual smell of which was sharp and chemical. This was different, softer, almost sweet. He activated the light on his helmet and swept the beam across the room. What he saw made him stop breathing. In the corner, curled against the wall, was but not a warrior. This one was smaller, more slender. Her carapace was a pale blue instead of the dark brown of the fighters, and she was dying. Danny could see the cracks in her shell, the pale fluid leaking from wounds that would never heal. She had been caught in the bombardment, and there was nothing that could save her now. But that was not what made Danny's heart stop. Beneath her, pressed against her body for warmth and protection, were three small forms. They were tiny, no bigger than human infants. Their shells were soft and translucent, their limbs thin and fragile. Two of them were still. Their bodies had gone cold, but the third was alive. It was the source of the sound Danny had heard. A cry, a wail, the universal language of a child calling for help that would not come. The dying mother looked up at Danny. Her compound eyes, so different from human eyes, somehow managed to convey something that needed no translation. Fear, desperation, love. She was looking at the soldier who had helped destroy her home, who had killed her kind, and she was begging. Not for herself, for her child. Her claw reached toward Danny, trembling with the last of her strength. A sound escaped her mandibles, not the clicking of speech, something else. Something softer, a sound that Danny realized with a shock that ran through his entire body was a word. Please. She had learned a human word. Somehow, somewhere, she had learned the word that her enemy used when they had nothing left but hope. Danny stood frozen. His rifle was aimed at her out of habit, but his finger had moved away from the trigger without him realizing it. He watched as the light faded from her eyes. Her claw fell to the ground. Her body went still. The small child wailed again. It pushed against its mother's body, trying to wake her, trying to bring back the warmth that was quickly fading. Its tiny claws scratched at her shell in a gesture so painfully familiar that Danny felt something break inside his chest. He had seen death before. He had caused death before. He had watched friends die in his arms and enemies die at his feet. But he had never seen this. He had never seen a child crying for its mother. He had never seen grief that crossed the boundary between species. His comm crackled. "Cole, report, what's your position?" Danny did not answer. He could not answer. He could only stand there, looking at the small creature that was now utterly alone in a universe that had taken everything from it. The child looked up at him. Its eyes were not like its mother's. They were larger, clearer, still forming into what they would become. And in those eyes, Danny saw something that he had never seen in a before. Trust. It did not know what he was. It did not understand that he was the enemy. All it knew was that it was alone and afraid, and there was someone standing in front of it, someone who might help. Danny heard footsteps behind him. His squad was catching up. They would be here in seconds. They would see what he had found, and then a decision would have to be made. For the first time in 11 years of war, Danny did not know what to do. Sam was the first to reach the entrance. He pushed through the broken doorway with his rifle ready, expecting to find his sergeant in danger. What he found instead made him stop so suddenly that Ben nearly crashed into him from behind. "Sarge," Sam's voice was barely a whisper. What is that?" Danny did not turn around. He could not take his eyes off the small creature that was still crying for its dead mother. "It's a child," he said. Amy squeezed past the two soldiers and moved to Danny's side. Her medic's eyes quickly took in the scene. The dead mother, the two still forms beside her, the one survivor trembling and wailing in the dim light. Her face went through several emotions in the span of a few seconds: shock, confusion, and then something softer that she could not name. "I've never seen young ones before," she said quietly. "I didn't even know they had children like this." "Everything has children," Danny replied. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, distant, like it belonged to someone else. Kate's voice came through the comm, sharp and urgent. "Cole, respond. What is your status?" Danny reached up slowly and switched off his comm. The others watched him with wide eyes, not understanding what he was doing, not understanding what he was thinking. How could they? He did not understand it himself. The small child looked up at him again. Its crying had faded to a soft whimper. It was exhausted, scared, dying probably without its mother's warmth to sustain it. Its tiny claws still rested on its mother's shell, unwilling to let go of the only safety it had ever known. 11 years. 11 years of war. 11 years of hate and death and revenge. Danny thought of all the friends he had lost. He thought of the colonies that had burned. He thought of the nightmares that still woke him in the cold hours of the night, nightmares filled with clicking mandibles and compound eyes and the screams of the dying. There were monsters, everyone knew that. They had slaughtered humanity without mercy. They had shown no compassion, no hesitation, no remorse. They were the enemy, and the enemy deserved nothing but destruction. But looking at this child, Danny could not see a monster. He could only see a small creature that had just lost everything. A creature that had never hurt anyone. A creature that had no idea why the universe had chosen to take away everything it loved. He thought of his own childhood. He thought of his mother who had died when he was 10. He remembered the feeling of standing beside her bed in the hospital, holding her hand, not understanding why she would not wake up. He remembered the cold emptiness that had followed, the sense that the world had ended and no one had told him. This child was feeling that now. This child was feeling exactly what he had felt all those years ago. Danny dropped to one knee. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Sam asked. There was fear in his voice now, fear and confusion. Danny set his rifle on the ground. He removed his helmet and placed it beside the weapon. The air of IV was thin and cold against his skin, but he did not care. He needed the child to see his face. He needed it to know that he was not just a machine of war. Slowly, carefully, he reached toward the small. The child flinched. Its whimpering grew louder, but it did not run. It had nowhere to run, and something in its eyes suggested that it was tired of being afraid. Danny's hands touched the soft shell of the child. It was warm, warmer than he had expected, and fragile, so incredibly fragile. He could feel the life pulsing beneath the surface, delicate and precious and so easily extinguished. He lifted the child into his arms. It weighed almost nothing. Its small claws gripped his armor, searching for something to hold onto. Its body trembled against his chest. And then, slowly, the crying stopped. The child pressed its face against Danny's neck and went quiet. The battlefield fell silent. It was not a gradual thing. It was sudden, complete, as if someone had turned off all the sound in the universe at once. Danny became aware that they were not alone. Through the broken walls of the structure he could see movement. Warriors, regrouping in the distance, had stopped. They were watching. Their weapons were lowered. On the ridge behind him, Danny knew that human soldiers were watching too. He could feel their eyes on his back. He could feel their confusion, their disbelief, their fear. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the soft breathing of the child in his arms. Amy stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady. "I don't know anything about physiology. I don't know if I can help it, but I can try." Danny looked at her. In her eyes he saw something he had not seen in a long time. Compassion. The simple human desire to ease suffering, regardless of who or what was suffering. "Then try," he said. She nodded and began to open her medical kit. Her hands were shaking, but she did not stop. Ben had not lowered his rifle. He was watching the warriors in the distance, waiting for them to attack. But they did not attack. They just stood there motionless, as if they had been frozen in time. Sam finally found his voice. "Sarge, they're going to kill us for this. Command is going to have our heads. This is the enemy. We can't just..." "Can't just what?" Danny asked. His voice was calm, calmer than it had any right to be. Can't show mercy, can't choose to save a life instead of taking one. It's a child. Sam opened his mouth to argue, but nothing came out. He looked at the small creature in Danny's arms, at its tiny claws and soft shell, and the way it had curled against the human who should have been its enemy. And something in his face changed. The anger and fear slowly faded, replaced by something he could not quite understand. Danny stood. The child in his arms stirred but did not wake. It had fallen asleep against his chest, exhausted by grief and fear and the simple warmth of being held. He looked out at the silent battlefield, at the warriors who watched without attacking, at the human soldiers who watched without understanding. Something had changed. He did not know what it was. He did not know what it would mean. But he knew, with a certainty that went deeper than words, that nothing would ever be the same again. The image traveled faster than light. Someone had captured the moment. A soldier on the ridge, maybe, with a helmet camera, or a drone overhead recording the battle for later analysis. It did not matter how it happened. What mattered was that within hours, every human colony and every hive had seen it. A human soldier, kneeling on a battlefield covered with the dead, his helmet off, his weapon on the ground, and in his arms, cradled against his chest like something precious, the child of his enemy. On Earth, the news networks ran the image on every channel. Politicians argued about what it meant. Military commanders demanded to know how such a breach of protocol had occurred. Citizens watched in silence, not knowing whether to feel anger or hope or something else entirely. Danny's mother had been right. She had always told him that a single act of kindness could change the world. He had not believed her. He had thought that the universe was too big and too cruel for one person to make any difference. But now, standing in the ruins of the command post with a sleeping child in his arms, he understood what she had meant. Kate arrived with a full squad of reinforcements. Her face was pale and her hands were shaking. She looked at Danny, at the child, at the warriors still standing motionless in the distance. "Cole," she said slowly, "do you have any idea what you've done?" "Yes, ma'am," Danny replied. "I saved a life." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she let out a breath that seemed to carry all the weight of the war with it. Command is losing their minds. They don't know what to do. They haven't attacked. They're just watching. No one has ever seen them do this before. Maybe no one ever gave them a reason to. Kate had no answer for that. She turned and looked at the enemy forces in the distance. They had gathered in larger numbers now. Hundreds of warriors, maybe more. But still they did not attack. They simply waited, their compound eyes fixed on the human soldiers and the child that one of them carried. Then something happened that changed everything. A single separated from the group. It was older than the others. Danny could tell by the patterns on its shell, faded with age and marked with ceremonial scars. It carried no weapon. It wore no armor. It simply walked across the open ground toward the human lines, alone and undefended. Every rifle in the company swung toward it. Fingers tightened on triggers. Commands were shouted, but Kate raised her hand. "Hold fire," she ordered. Her voice was tight with tension, but it did not waver. "Everyone hold fire." The old stopped a few meters from Danny. Up close, it was even more imposing than it had seemed from a distance. Its body was covered in the marks of 100 battles. Its eyes were clouded with age but still sharp. It looked at Danny, then at the child in his arms, then back at Danny again. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. The wind blew dust across the ground and the gray sky pressed down on them all. Then the old did something that no human had ever seen it do. It bowed. Not a deep bow, just a slight lowering of its head, but the meaning was unmistakable. It was a gesture of respect, of acknowledgement, of something that might have been gratitude. Kate scrambled to set up a translation device. It was old technology, barely functional, designed more for interrogation than conversation. But it was all they had. She activated it and waited. The old made a series of clicking sounds. The device hummed and processed, then produced a rough approximation of the words in a flat, mechanical voice. "We did not know your kind could do this." Danny swallowed hard. "Do what?" "More clicking, more processing. Spare what you could destroy, protect what is not your own. We thought you were like us, killers, destroyers. We thought the war was all there was." "The war doesn't have to be all there is," Danny said. The old was silent for a long time. Its eyes moved from Danny's face to the child still sleeping in his arms. When it spoke again, the translator struggled to convey something that sounded almost like wonder. "This child is not of your blood, not of your hive. We killed your kind, we burned your worlds, and yet you hold her as if she were your own. Why?" Danny thought about the question. He thought about all the reasons he could give: duty, honor, morality, the things that humans told themselves when they wanted to feel good about their choices. But none of those reasons felt true. None of them captured what he had felt in that moment when he looked into the eyes of a dying mother and saw himself reflected there. "Because she was alone," Danny finally said. "Because she was afraid. Because someone had to help her and I was there." The old processed this in silence. Then it spoke again, and this time its voice was softer. The translator could not capture tone, but somehow Danny felt it anyway. "We have fought your kind for 11 cycles. We have studied your tactics, your weapons, your weaknesses. But we did not study this. We did not know that you could choose mercy over victory. We did not know that you could love what you should hate." Kate stepped forward. "What does this mean? Are you offering peace?" The old turned its ancient eyes toward her. "I am offering understanding. Peace will take time, but understanding can begin now. Because of this human, because of what he has done, he has shown us something we did not know existed, and that changes everything." The child stirred in Danny's arms. She opened her eyes and looked up at him, and for the first time since he had found her, she did not cry. She simply looked at him with those strange, beautiful eyes and made a soft sound that might have been contentment. Danny held her closer and wondered if his mother, somewhere in whatever came after death, was smiling. 15 years passed. 15 years of slow, painful progress. 15 years of negotiations and setbacks and moments when it seemed like the old hatred would consume everything. But humanity and the did not return to full war. Something had changed on that day on IV. Something that could not be undone. Danny Cole never returned to combat. The military did not know what to do with him. Some wanted to court-martial him for disobeying orders. Others wanted to give him medals. In the end, they did neither. They simply reassigned him to a new role, one that had never existed before. He became a liaison, a translator, a bridge between two species that were slowly learning to understand each other. The child he had saved that day was given a name. He called her Hope because that was what she represented. She grew up in a strange world, surrounded by humans who did not know how to care for her and who did not know how to trust humans. But she survived. More than that, she thrived. Hope learned both languages. She learned human customs and traditions. She learned to move between two worlds that had spent so long trying to destroy each other. And as she grew, she became something that no one had expected. She became a symbol, a living proof that the two species could coexist. Danny watched her grow with a mixture of pride and wonder. He had never had children of his own. The war had taken that possibility from him, along with so many other things. But hope filled a space in his heart that he had not known was empty. She called him father in both languages, and every time she said it, he felt something warm bloom in his chest. The peace talks were long and difficult. There were factions on both sides that wanted nothing more than to continue the killing. Old wounds did not heal easily. Old hatreds did not fade overnight. But slowly, day by day, year by year, progress was made. Danny was there for all of it. He sat in rooms filled with diplomats and generals and elders, translating not just words but meanings. He helped each side understand what the other truly wanted. He reminded them, again and again, that they had more in common than they realized. Both species loved their children. Both species mourned their dead. Both species dreamed of a future where their kind could live without fear. Hope was there too as she grew older. She spoke at councils and assemblies, her voice carrying the weight of two civilizations. She told the story of how she had been found, how she had been saved, how she had been raised by a man who should have been her enemy. And when she spoke, even the hardest hearts softened. On the day the treaty was finally signed, Danny was 50 years old. His hair had turned gray, and his body carried the scars of a lifetime of war. He stood in the great hall of the neutral station that had been built specifically for this moment, surrounded by humans and who had gathered to witness the end of the conflict. Hope stood beside him. She was taller than him now, her blue carapace gleaming in the light of 100 stars. On her chest, she wore two symbols, the ceremonial marks of an elder granted to her by the High Council, and a small patch bearing the flag of Earth given to her by Danny on her 5th birthday. The High Elder rose to speak. His voice was old and rough, but the translator carried his words clearly through the hall. For generations, we believed that strength meant destruction. We believed that the only way to survive was to eliminate all threats. We looked at humanity and saw only enemies to be destroyed. We did not look deeper. We did not see what you truly were. He paused and turned his ancient eyes toward Danny. 15 cycles ago, a single human taught us something we did not know. He showed us that true strength is not the power to destroy. True strength is the power to spare, the power to protect, the power to choose mercy when the world expects violence. The hall was silent. Every eye, human and alike, was fixed on the elder. We have a word in our language for this quality. We did not use it often because we did not believe it was valuable. But now we understand that it is perhaps the most valuable thing in the universe. You call it mercy. We will call it the same. He turned to face the entire assembly. Let this treaty mark not just the end of war but the beginning of understanding. Let our children grow up knowing that their enemies became their friends. Let the galaxy remember that it was not weapons or tactics that saved us. It was a single act of compassion. It was a human, kneeling beside the child of his enemy, choosing love over hate. The treaty was signed. The war was officially over, and as the delegation celebrated, Danny slipped away from the crowd. He found a quiet observation deck overlooking the stars and stood there alone, watching the lights of distant worlds. Hope found him there, as she always did. "You're missing the celebration," she said softly. Danny smiled. "I've never been much for parties." She moved to stand beside him, her presence warm and familiar. For a moment, they simply watched the stars together. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had walked away?" Hope asked. "If you had left me there?" Danny considered the question. He thought about the war that might have continued, the millions more who might have died, the two species that might have fought until one or both were extinct. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but then I look at you and I remember why I didn't." Hope leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you, Father, for everything." Danny put his arm around her, feeling the warmth of her shell against his side. "Thank you for giving me something worth fighting for." They stood there together as the stars wheeled overhead, a human and a father and daughter, proof that even in the darkest universe, light could still be found. The war was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere in the vast silence between worlds, the galaxy itself seemed to whisper a single truth, that in the end, it was not weapons or ships or armies that had made humanity remarkable. It was their stubborn, beautiful, impossible belief that even enemies could become family, that even hatred could become love, that even war could become peace. It was their capacity to kneel beside the dying and choose to save what remained. It was their mercy, and it had changed everything.